everyone, and welcome back to the Shock Absorber podcast. And it is wonderful to be here alongside my friend Tim. Hello, Tim.
Hello,
Just
my friend Joel.
Yes, hello, my friend. You were unwell last week. You going okay now?
Yeah, I'm much better. Yeah, at the tail end. I got knocked out really badly by a head cold. I was really hoping for one of the special varieties. I did one of those swab tests that test for all RSV and influenzas and COVIDs, and no, it was just garden variety head cold.
It is interesting how we can test for it now. People are like, I've got influenza A. You've never heard people say that before.
No, right, yeah. I mean, in one sense, I didn't want to. I wasn't going to test because, actually, it didn't matter what I had. I was going to avoid people, stay at home and rest. Yep. So, in that sense, what does it matter? But then I was like, actually, both me and my daughter were quite unwell. Right. I thought, maybe it is worth just kind of knowing what is it, will that change expectations? So we both tested and we both nothing. We're both on the mend, we're fine, and now my wife has got it, so she's, as the time of recording, is very unwell at home. So
like she's not on the podcast.
Yeah, that's right, yeah, so we're sharing around, but yes.
We should call her in. How are you feeling?
Yeah. But you guys did brilliantly last week, talking about meme culture.
With
Braden and Ethan, it was great.
A lot of credit to Braden and Ethan, they're in contact with our youth much more than I am.
Yes. Just finger on the pulse of youth culture.
Just that makes me think of makes you think I sound really old. Yeah, those youth, those young people. But yeah, it was fun, and I think it was a good way to look at meme culture from a Christian lens. And I think that was really cool. And the way that Ethan said, God's still working, and He's still making Christians, whether the internet's there or not. And
yes.
I think that was really helpful and a good reflection on why it's so wonderful to have the foundation of the gospel in regards to anything we do. And we're recording this just however many days, must be, 5 days? Yeah, 5 days since the Bondi terrorist attack, which has been awful to see. And we were going to start by kind of talking that in relation to the sermon that you preached that morning on why can't I find God in my why can't I find peace in my life? That was the title of it. So do you want to share your reflections on that? We're not going to get political. We're not going to make a comment or anything about the actual event. We'll leave the authorities and the news organisations to deal with that. But
yes,
in terms of finding peace when something like this can really be a challenge to how we live as a society, I think that's where your sermon probably hits home quite well. Yeah,
so obviously I was preparing and preaching the sermon before these events happened on a Sunday evening. And so it was general in one extent of thinking about what does it mean to find peace, and can we find peace? Why can't I find peace? And one of the things I was particularly leaning into, this goes back to the conversations we've had previously about tech culture, digital culture, AI, social media, all those kinds of things. So I lean pretty heavily into some stats from Jonathan Haidt and others. If people want the full text of my sermon, I'll say this up front, you can go to my Substack and I've put it all there, so we can link that in the show notes as well. So you can kind of see exactly what I've said. I didn't edit it at all from what I actually spoke, so it's just all there. But I was thinking about, why do we feel peacelessness? And again, Jonathan Haidt has done a good job of saying one of the causes, not the only cause, but one of the causes is that we are habitually online, and online creates cultures and habits and habitats in which we are discontent, dissatisfied, constantly aware of all the terrible things that happen in the world. And again, this week has been particularly hard to try to be aware enough of what is going on.
Some of the videos.
Oh, well, that's right. It's videos, it's commentary, it's people's hot takes, it's all of the misinformation, it's all of the bad AI-generated, mistakes or, intentional distractions from truth, falsehood, all of that kind of stuff has been really hard. So I've tried to find myself a little bit online, but try not to be too online. But yeah, the fact that our habitats online create discontent and create dissatisfaction and a peacelessness, and we can kind of see, Jonathan Haidt's been really good at showing the rise of depression, anxiety, suicidation, all of those kinds of things, particularly in young people, but actually across all generations. And so that's one of the reasons that we find this peacelessness. We can't find peace in our lives. And then, so what is peace in the Bible? Well, peace is the wholeness, the coming together. The shalom is the Hebrew word, which brings its external peace. So it is the ceasing of war and strife and heartache and all those kind of things. It is also internal. It's social, it's economic, it's political, it's emotional. It kind of covers everything. And one of the things I wanted to drive home was the idea that peace is a gift that is given to us. So the Spirit is a spirit of peace. Christ brings peace. One of the major Advent themes as we lead up to Christmas is that Jesus brings peace. And so all of that is really significant. It's a gift that we are given. It's supernatural, it's Spirit empowered gift. And so it's important to recognize that. The other thing is that you see this common thread in Scripture, that peace is something that we are to bring. So it's an act of obedience to live at peace, to seek out peace, to live at peace with outsiders, with everyone that we can. And so you've got this both a gift and an act of obedience, and both of them are Spirit given. So the Holy Spirit gifts us peace, and the Holy Spirit empowers us to live at peace and to pursue peace and seek peace. And so that was kind of the broad theological foundation of what we are doing, of what I did in my sermon. And so then I sort of turned the question of, well, how do I find peace in my life? Sort of changed it slightly to how do we receive peace? If peace is a gift that we're given, then it's not necessarily, well, God's hiding it from us and we have to go and seek it and find it, but He's willingly gifting it to us by His Spirit. How does He actually do that? And so the final part of the sermon was to turn to Philippians 4, where it says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And it was really curious to me as I was pondering this during the week, was how does peace guard your heart and your mind? It feels like it's a weird metaphor that he's going for there. And, doing some reading and doing some more reflection and prayer and thinking that actually it's because prayer and bringing your requests to God is an act of relationship with God, that it's in that living out of relationship with God that creates that guarding and that fortress in our hearts and minds, recognizing that because I can bring everything to God, because I know that He is good, He is sovereign, He is Lord, He is King, He is also friend and Father. Because of all of that, when I bring my anxieties to Him, my depression, when I bring, whether it be a terrorist attack, whether it be something that's going on in my household, like sickness and illness, you've got micro to macro level of anxieties that we all face. The act of bringing that to God is an act of faith. It's an act of obedience, and it's an act of trust and relationship with a good Father. And that is what is producing that protection around our hearts and our minds, that we, will protect us against anxieties, not from them happening. And also what I was curious, and I think I got this from Gordon Fee, one of the commentaries I was reading, was it's actually not in the answering of prayer that peace comes, but it's through the act of praying that peace comes. And I think that's an important distinction, because I may not get the answer that I'm praying for. I may ask for an end of sickness. I might ask for an end of political unrest. I might pray for, the end of suffering. God doesn't promise that He will always answer those prayers in the way that we want. Sometimes He says, no, my grace is sufficient, like He says to Paul. But it's the act of prayer, regardless of the answer to prayer, which is the fostering of that relationship and therefore the peace that guards our hearts and minds. So anyway, that was the sermon that I preached on Sunday morning. And I think, obviously by God's sovereignty, I hope that is helpful to people this side of then the terrorist attack that happened on that evening.
And it's not a direct answer to that actual event happening, is it? But I do find it helpful to know, to always seek, to know the fact that we can always seek God in those scenarios, those difficult things. And I was struck by Louise Perry, who we've mentioned a number of times before. She wrote an article about the attacks. And like I said, we're not going to get into the details of the attack or anything because we don't know enough about it. But she... her father is Australian, I believe, so she has some idea of Australia, what's going on in Australian culture. And she talked about how the fact that it happened at such an iconic location in Bondi is that was an attack on somewhere that's Australian culture sees as something that's really integral to being Australian, is Australian beach culture, and it's a place where anyone can go. We talked about before that very rarely do your things get stolen when you leave them on the beach, for example. She says that there's a tacit system of unwritten rules. So when something like this, something as horrific as this happens, we see that beach culture and maybe as a place of peace. Like when you go to the beach, you get to enjoy the sun and the sand and God's creation and all that thing. And when something like the Bondi attacks happen, it's like, everything that happened with it is really saddening, but it is also, I think part of it is that, well, I don't know anyone affected by the attacks, but you see it as in this wider perspective as well of like, this is Australian culture. This is something that probably makes us unique as Australians, and it's an attack on that as well. And it's hard to find that piece that you were talking about in that as well, I think.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that the attack itself wasn't targeting beach culture.
No.
From what we know, the attack was intentionally targeting Jewish and Jewishness.
It was.
And so there is that religious, racial element to it, which is really important to recognise. But yeah, I think Louise Perry's piece is sort of going beyond that to, larger systems that are involved.
That's the point I was
in Australia.
trying to make.
In cultural.
And think about how it doesn't feel peaceful.
No.
That's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I didn't want to sound glib about the attacks either, but I think I also don't want to sound like I know what I'm talking about with it too.
And we've never strived to be a hot take podcast. So, we're sort of we're intentionally not doing that. But thinking about broadly, but thinking about it theologically as well in terms of that. What does it mean to have a Christ who we are in relationship with, a God who cares about our cries and our pleas and our prayers. One of the podcasts, it was an American podcast, but they referenced this event during the week, talked about the importance of lament as well. And I think I'll get into this a little bit this week in my sermon. And
God, why would I want a relationship with you? Is that how
So the one being preached this weekend is, God, why would you want a relationship with me? And anyway, one of the applications of when you have a secure relationship with anyone, and it's a safe relationship, it is safe to then complain to that person about the things that are making you sad or angry or upset or whatever. And so what we see, particularly in the Psalms, is the psalmist's secure relationship with God that allows them to complain to God and cry out to God and be angry in God's presence, even angry with God sometimes. And I think it's important to recognise that we can do that within the safety and security of that relationship. So again, it comes back to this idea that because I can pray to God, whether in joy and celebration or whether in anxiety and depression or whether in anger and frustration and all of everything, every emotion we can bring to God because we have this secure relationship. Paul talks in Romans, nothing can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus. And because of that, because of the atonement, ultimately, and that the atonement brings us into relationship with God, we are secure in that relationship that we can bring all of our pain and suffering and anger and anguish and everything to God, and that's a signal of a relationship strength and health that you can do that. And so I can't remember where I was going with this, but again, just in the face of things like, you know, this terrorist attack or whatever it is that we might be facing, the ability to come to God with tears, sadness, anger, on the other hand, joy, celebration, you know, whatever we're facing, is a sign of that relationship and the fact that we have a relationship with God. I think that's a central point of how do we respond to these types of things.
I was thinking about just there, you're saying that people that are angry and frustrated with God, and I think you sent me an article this week about the title is "Why Didn't Your Grandparents Deconstruct?"
Yeah.
And a lot of deconstructionism, we were talking about this just before recording it, we think that deconstruction movie is probably like around your age, not my age, even though we're both millennials, it's more around the
older millennials.
The old, it sounds such a weird, what a strange comment to make. But tell me why you sent that to me, because I actually love it when you are reading so much more than me and you send me all these little things. I'm like, I love the fact that you want to send them to me and I want to read them, and sometimes I don't read them, so I feel bad.
No, that's fine.
But why did you choose to send that to me today?
I read it a couple of weeks ago, I think. It's dated from July. I think it only just popped up in my Substack feed a couple of weeks ago. So the author is Paul Anleitner. I think that's how you say his name. Someone I had not heard of before.
Anleitner, maybe?
Anleitner. Mm-hmm. But yeah, fascinating conversation in this piece about why our grandparents didn't deconstruct. And I mean, part of the reason I sent it to you was I was listening to your conversation last week with Ethan and Braden.
Oh, okay.
And this idea of that there are cultural movements and moments and what that looks like, and how each generation still has cultural movements that define who they are. And one of the things he talks about in this article is that church hurt isn't new, but leaving the church is. And so, and again, I mean, just by looking at his photo, he seems to be about the same age as me. Either a young X or an older millennial. And thinking about, there does seem to be a lot of people in this generation, this age group, who are kind of mid-30s to mid-40s at the moment. That's where I hear a lot of the deconstruction conversation coming from. Maybe that's just because of who I listen to, I don't know. But he talks about how the reasons that are often given are church hurt, moral failure, bad theology, or unanswered questions. And he says, yep, they're all real. And they're all painful, and they're all frustrating, and they all exist. So he acknowledges that. He says, but they're not new. Like, none of those started in the 1990s when we were going through a youth group. They've been around for centuries, all of those things. So why is it that it's those who grew up in youth group in the 1990s that have felt those things and left the church? Why is church leaving and deconstruction something that our grandparents never went through? Why didn't older generations who also experienced those things leave church? And so then he talks about these big meta narratives that shape our culture. The postmodern narrative, you guys talked about that last week.
Postmodernists winning, that was the argument about memes.
Yes, that's right, yes.
Won.
Yep. Yeah, and so one of the big things about postmodernism is both the multiplicity of narratives that we could choose to live in.
That's true. Rather
than a single narrative. So there was a largely homogenous narrative, hegemony, there's another fancy word. There was this hegemonic narrative in the West for a long time. And postmodernism is the fracturing of that. So there's now many narratives. Also, sort of under the guise of saying that there actually is no meta-narrative. And so both of those kind of go hand in hand. There is no meta-narrative that holds us all together. Therefore, there's actually multiple narratives and you get to pick and choose which one. And there's lots of options. And so one of the big cultural reasons that he is noticing is the reason that people deconstruct is because there's an ability to deconstruct. So if you have experienced church hurt and moral failings and unanswered questions, and yet you're so within the
hegemonic.
There you go. It's a very hard word to say.
It is, isn't it?
Hegemony.
Because it doesn't read as you as you say it. You don't say it as you read it.
Yeah. If you're stuck in that meta-narrative, even when you notice the problems, there's nowhere else to go. You're still within the meta-narrative.
That's his argument about kind of his grandparents'
the
generation.
Grandparent generation, yes. Whereas postmodernism, which I mean was intellectually in the 40s, 50s, 60s, but popular level in the late 80s, early 90s, so the area that the older millennials were growing up in and coming of age during this time, is if you are frustrated with one story, you actually got a plethora of stories that you can choose, and you can go off and find other stories.
Right.
So there's a volume of stories that we consume that we can pick and choose from. So that's one of the things. The other thing he talks about is actually what the shape and the spirit of these stories are. And the shape of the spirit of these stories is one of deconstruction. So he talks about how the postmodern influence, here's a couple of dot points from his article. Truth is socially constructed. Institutions and hierarchies are inherently corrupt. Every story hides a play for power, so be suspicious and cynical by default. Christianity in particular has been a story used by the powerful to repress and colonize the marginalized. And the path to authenticity and liberation is through deconstruction. Wow. And so those things kind of ring true. I mean, ironically, this is the meta-narrative of postmodernism, which claims that there is no meta-narrative. This is part of that overarching story, is that every story is inherently a grab for power. And so we should question every story. And it's right to question a story, and it's right to throw off the stories that you have grown up with. And so his argument here is why our grandparents didn't deconstruct, but why it's so prevalent in our age group is this, those who are coming of age in the 90s are being surrounded by this story that your authentic self is shaped by your casting off of the narrative that you grew up with. And that's actually what it is. So, it's The Simpsons making fun of absolutely everything. Nothing is sacred.
Yep.
Of which
South Park, for example.
Well, South Park is then The Simpsons on steroids.
Yeah.
And you can see that as kind of like a half generation later. So The Simpsons is like, well, The Simpsons warmed us up for deconstruction. And South Park, I see your Simpsons and we raise you South Park.
Simpsons for me is like primary school, South Park is high school.
That's right, yeah. And so you've got that. And so, yes, this idea that the postmodern narratives is what shapes deconstruction.
That was kind of the argument even looking at the 6-7 mean.
Yeah.
That it was basically the argument was it's gone so far, that postmodernist deconstructionism kind of thing, that they're now, the memes are a result. And this was the argument that the Instagram reel we watched was they're trying to make sense of it being deconstructed that far, I think.
Yes, yeah. And so what I'll just read a couple of paragraphs here. He says, unlike our grandparents' generation who were never shaped by the postmodern anti-story, our cultural scripts have programmed us to see deconstruction as one of the chief markers of an authentic life. Our new cultural catechism taught us that if something feels painful or constraining, the answer isn't reform, it's exit. We are subtly programmed to believe that all overarching stories mask a play for power, especially religion. If an institution fails you, walk away or burn it down in your Che Guevara, Heath Ledger Joker or Rick and Morty t-shirt. The hurts and pains in a journey of faith from one generation to the next are not that different, but what has changed is how we have been culturally programmed to respond to them. And I think I find that quite helpful as an understanding of why deconstruction is so big. So whether it's people, there's a rise in the ex-evangelical movement, so those who are leaving the evangelical church, many for no faith at all, many for a churchless faith. So they might say, well, I still believe in Jesus, but I don't go to church. Church is one of those institutions that I've left behind, or is so wrong, it can't be reformed, I just need to burn it down. You see those who want to cling on to faith but deconstruct significant parts of the story that they grew up with. So there's a big rise in those who are rejecting penal substitutionary atonement. Again, it seems to be what I noticed, that a lot of the people who are writing against penal substitutionary atonement seem to be my age group, and it seems to be part of this deconstruction ethos. And some are doing it, better than others in terms of, let's go back to the text, see what it actually says. But there is still this spirit of, it was part of the story that I inherited growing up, and I need to throw that off, And so there's all sorts of things going on there that have this very deconstruction spirit to them. And I think what he's doing is putting his finger on the cultural pulse of why that is the case, particularly for this maybe micro generation of mid-30s to mid-40s.
Yeah, I think my reaction to that also is that, let's say I'm half a generation behind you, for example, that I'm not sure if I felt that there was anything I needed to throw off. I think maybe felt if we're talking about Christianity, I grew up going to Catholic scripture, but that was about it, really, like in terms of knowledge about Bible, God. So when I was presented with as something new, it was like, oh, hang on. Or maybe I'm accepting that as a way of throwing off the lack of being taught about it at any rate, and then therefore I could choose to take it on myself. Maybe that's one why that's part of it. Yeah, maybe the your generations are the last vestiges of throwing off what he's saying in his grandparents' age, is that there's really, like, I think maybe what he's saying, his grandparents, there was really one way of growing up, and that was about it. However, then the postmodernist actions or effect on those generations have come down to the point where now I was like, oh, Christianity is this thing that I can pick up and it's a new thing.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just my personal experience, but
and I think, and again, maybe this is just because it was my perspective in the 90s, but it would be interesting to see some data trends of youth group attendance over decades. But there did seem to be a cultural high point in the 90s in that evangelical youth subculture seemed to spread beyond the church. So I was noticing you didn't have to go to church to know what a What Would Jesus Do band was, like little wrist bracelet thing. Okay. So they were really, really popular.
There was a big Christian music scene, for example.
Massive, right? Yeah. So you've got, Tooth and Nail is kind of the high point of alternative music scene for sort of out of the Christian market that then influenced the rest of the world. So you've got this Christian or mostly Christian label whose bands are headlining Warped Tour. And, bands like Norma Jean, Under Oath, MXPX, all of which sort of started with faith-based, Christian-ish type lyrics and members being at the cutting edge of their particular subgenre of alternative punk metal. And so, Christian subculture exploded out of the church during this time, for better or for worse. And I think that's kind of what... And so you had a whole generation, some of whom were connected with church, some who went with friends to churches, some who were growing up in the church. But it was very aware. And I read people from America who didn't necessarily grow up at church, but they know what Would Jesus Do band is. They know what VeggieTales is. They know what Christian music is. They've got this awareness of evangelical subculture, which is actually quite strange, considering their sometimes lack of engagement in church. So, you've got this cultural high point. I don't know whether attendance was particularly high. We certainly noticed a high point in attendance at Soul Revival, and I think looking at a number of churches across Sydney at the time, a high point in teenage attendance and high school ministries. And so it's that generation that seems to be reacting and pushing against what they either grew up with or noticed when they visited their friends' churches or whatever it was. And what I quite like about his final point is that maybe deconstruction itself deserves to be deconstructed. What if walking away from church wasn't a rebellious act of self-definition, but the most predictable outcome of our programming? What if you have to live in some story, and what if religion was the pursuit of the highest guiding story? Maybe you can't be non-religious. And so noticing that maybe there's a shift back again. So he doesn't
shift,
really,
as he calls it.
vibe shift. This is the second last paragraph of his article. So he doesn't really get into what that might be, but noticing those kinds of things as well. So yeah, I thought it was interesting. I thought it was an interesting piece on what is happening with the zeitgeist. And again, particularly because it's my generation and my peers that seem to be caught up a lot in this deconstruction. It was one of the things that piqued my interest in this article.
It's good. And it's interesting that we've kind of talked about a few different traditions and that we're used to. I mean, I was thinking the other day and talking to someone about how, I think it's actually you alerted me to this, is that how in our culture now where there's a lack of rites of passage.
Right, yep.
And how there are some good things, like in response to your kind of thoughts that you've brought up about postmodernism breaking things down, there's also this thing of a yearning, as we've talked about before, about the quiet revival in the UK, or people going to seek out going to Catholic services. They're yearning for some structure and some tradition and stories that are inherited from passed on. There's a real there seems to be real seeking from that as well. And we mentioned Australian beach culture, like I said, and then we're talking about, what church was and what are the good parts, what are the parts that we need to move on. And it's like a lot of what we try and talk about in the Shock Absorber. What are the things that we want to hold onto the timeless gospel, but we don't want things in the way of getting us adapting to culture as well. And that doesn't mean we change our theology or anything like that, but it feels like there are these forces constantly acting on how we are as Christians and how we need to look at it in different ways in the world. But as we come up to Christmas, that's a tradition that, it's funny that that's a Christian tradition, but that is still part of the zeitgeist.
Yep.
It's I get frustrated that people get so stressed about Christmas when it's meant to be a time, obviously, about celebrating the birth of Jesus, but also there's a lot of things that come with that too. Like one of our people at church, he works on the trains, and he says that there are more people getting hit by trains at this time of year because it's close to Christmas. And it's the same with hospitals and things like that. It's just a fascinating thing, the way that some of our traditions that we think are really important can also get in the way or can cause us to be sad. I suppose that's what I'm trying to say, is that it brings up a lot of emotions, like the end of the year and what has our year been like and things like that. So to finish up on this episode as a reasonably short one today, what do you think in terms of like how we do Christmas at church, and why I think we see it as one of like the four main events that we kind of do of the year? We just had our carols, Christmas carols at Kirrawee last week, which was amazing. Across the road from our Kirrawee gathering, we go into the Park of South Village, is a big, where you actually live. Unfortunately, you had to watch it from the balcony.
Watch it from my window.
Yeah. Because you're unwell, obviously. But we try not to be a very event-based church, but that is one of the events that we do. And we use it. One of the reasons that we want to do it is to invite people to come to our Christmas services. So again, maybe to wrap this up, is how do you think we as Soul Revival view Christmas and how we approach it? Now, I'd love to hear, like, we do the kids service at 5 p.m. on Christmas Eve. So yeah, let's hear how we do Christmas and how you particularly look at the children's service as well.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it is the high point of our year, like Christmas and Easter.
I actually love Christmas Eve. The service on Christmas Eve, kids and the one after it, is amazing. I love it.
Yeah, well, and so not just for Soul Revival, I think for Christians across the world, Christmas and Easter are the two high points. And as a particular church, Soul Revival, we add our week away and our planning days as our 4 kind of big things together that we really highly value. Those other 2, people can do, not do, I don't care. But Easter, Christmas really are the most significant. It's Jesus' birth and Jesus' death. And I say this, in our public schools, we can go in, and for those who allow their child to be in a Christian or Catholic scripture class, we do combined services for Easter and Christmas. And I say to the kids every time, the reason we all come together, because these are the things that we all have in common as Catholics and Christians, to celebrate together. They are the high points of our year: Jesus' birth and Jesus' death, resurrection. And so absolutely, we make much of Christmas. I realized a couple of years ago, and it was only because I was following more Americans on Twitter than I had, I think, previously, that in America, it's unusual to have a Christmas Day service. A lot of churches don't, particularly large churches. Smaller, medium-sized churches may do a Christmas Day service. But in the sort of the evangelical megachurch world, to do a Christmas Day service is unusual, which I find bizarre, because it's always been part of my, I don't know whether it's an Australian thing, I don't know whether it's an Anglican thing, but being at church on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day together has just been a normal part of my Christmas experience. It's always, brought up that way from my parents, because what else would you rather do on Christmas Day? Like, this is the day of Jesus' birth. Why wouldn't you be in church with God's family? So I find that a little bit strange to not be at church those 2 times. So what do we actually do at Soul Revival Church? Yes, we've got our Christmas Eve gatherings. We're going to have both our Kirrawee and our Miranda campus. We're going to have Christmas Eve gatherings and Christmas Day gatherings across both those campuses. So we'll be running a number of services. The kids' Christmas Eve, there's a whole strategy behind this. There's probably another episode. But in terms of, that's a fun, joyful, silly, but meaningful exploration of the nativity story in some ways. And so that's always a lot of fun to put together.
It's a lot of fun to be in it. I was in it last year.
You were in it last year,
Good fun.
Yes. We've got our friend Gemma, who will be on Chip Lunch very soon.
Yes, that's right.
Who is, her and her husband Jake are in this year's one. That's going to be a riot. So shout out to Anna Ware. Anna Ware is amazing, and she has written the script for Christmas Eve for quite a number of years, and that's a massive thing, because that's her skill set, not mine. I really, really value the partnership we have in Christmas Eve. And so, it's a host of characters, some sort of creative way to tell the nativity story. This year, we've got Gemma is a bit of a ditzy influencer who has stumbled across the nativity scene and is very interested in getting photos with the innkeeper and the angels and the sheep and the shepherds and the wise men. And her husband Jake is the influencer's husband, who
boyfriend of Instagram.
The boyfriend of Instagram, yeah, that's right. Who's following along, and because he is a bit of slower personality in terms of like he's reflective, watching what's going on, the influencer is kind of missing what's actually happening, and he's kind of like, hold on, I think there's actually something significant happening here. And so that's kind of the dynamic we're playing with. We decided not to try and explain why a 21st century influencer is in the nativity. That was... We went down that track for a while. I was like, do we explain time travel? Like, actually, no, we're not even going to try and bother explaining why this is the case. That's just part of the fun of it. But always tell the story of Christmas and make it really highlight why this is so significant that we tell this story every single year. And for our kids to get involved and to have fun doing it, and for them to rehearse and remember, again, this cultural story. This is who we are. We are people who live in light of the Christ, the King, coming to earth and being born as a baby. And so, that's why we do that. And then, as you said, it's followed after that sort of kids, very, very kiddish, open to anyone, but very, very kiddish service, followed by an all-in gathering, which, again, like you, is one of the highlights of my year. That service lots of carols.
They turn all the lights down.
Yeah, turn the lights down. We probably do twice as many songs as we would normally do in a gathering. Lots of singing. Always a great sermon.
It's
and
like
just
a great celebration.
Celebration of Christ the King at Christmas and Christmas Day again. Lots of visitors on Christmas Day, which is interesting. I think, again, as you say, it's still part of our Western Australian zeitgeist that Christmas is still one of those things you celebrate. And so people who we may only see once a year or twice a year turn up at Christmas, or people bring their non-believing families, friends. I think it's a great witness to be able to say to whether it's your parents or your children or whoever it might be, people in your surroundings who are not regular churchgoers, to say, hey, it's important for me to be at church on Christmas. Would you like to come with me? Because that's going to be part of how I celebrate Christmas Day. We see countless families and people for whom that is a really significant way to have their family once again hear the stories of Jesus. And so I think that bears fruit every year and is a really important way of doing that. And it's great for our regulars who also be at church on Christmas Day to be welcoming for those people as well. So so that's kind of how we do Christmas, and really looking forward to it. It's only, at the time of recording, it's only couple of days away. At the time of release, I think it's tomorrow.
That's right.
Happy Christmas. Merry Christmas for tomorrow.
Yeah. But that's a good way to finish, though. I think, is that, thank you for this year, Tim.
Thank you, Joel.
And thank you for everyone joining us on this journey of the Shock Absorber in the last of 2025. And a Merry Christmas to you, and a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to everyone else. We're going to take a break over the Christmas. So we won't have a couple of episodes for the Christmas break and New Year break, then we'll be back on deck talking more about the Shock Absorber and how do we respond to things as Christians.
Absolutely.
And also, how do we see what happens in culture and bring the Bible to bear on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you for everyone listening or watching. Email me, joel@shockabsorber.com.au, if you want to chat about anything that we have brought up on the podcast or in previous episodes. We'd love to hear from you, because that's what the Shock Absorber is about a conversation. And it has always been like that. And we've enjoyed the conversation today. But as always, we will finish the entire episode with a one way.
One way.
One way.